How's it going, everyone? In today's video, we're going to be going over how to create a front-end account edit page in WordPress without a plugin. So what we'll be going over is how to submit this form via AJAX. We'll also be going over how to check for required fields in PHP. And we'll also be sanitizing this data before it ever touches our database. As well, we will also be retrieving that data to populate the fields again once they've been saved. So if I change my name to Alexander, I hit save, refresh the page, it's still there. So I learned a lot doing this, and I think that you will too. So let's get started. So I want to preface this by we're not going to be spending a lot of time like marking this up or styling this. Really the focus of this is the behind the scenes interactions that are happening in JavaScript and in PHP. So if you want to know more about kind of how this is all laid out and styled, I'll include the link to the repository in the description where you can kind of take a deeper look at it. But for now, we're really going to focus on those two things that I just mentioned. So let's get started with some JavaScript. So really all we're going to care about right now is just making sure that we're getting all of the data that the user has entered in that form. So to do that, we first have to start selecting our form. So we're going to add an event listener to DOM content loaded, and we're going to just have a callback for that. We want to make sure that the page is loaded before we're trying to check for our form. So we're going to say const user account form is equal to document.getElementById, and that's going to be user account. Just want to make sure we're dealing with the right thing here. And if the user account form actually exists, so let's just check for a length here. Run into so many situations where you're starting to deal with a DOM element that doesn't exist, and then all sorts of errors happen. And then so really what we care about is the data once it's submitted. So let's check to see when it submits. So user account form, add event listener, submit, and we need a callback for that. Let's just do an arrow function here. And good. So every time that the form submits, we have a place to do something. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that it doesn't reload the page. If we go back to our form here, refresh it, every time that we hit save, it's kind of hard to see, but if you look at the bottom left, it says waiting for. It's just refreshing the page. So the first thing we want to do is keep it from refreshing the page, which is the default behavior of a form when you hit the submit button. So we're going to prevent the default behavior with that. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we have to get all of the form data. So let's create a new variable here. Const form data is equal to new form data, and we're going to pass it in our user account form. And what this is going to do is this is going to gather up all of our form data that we have over here and give it into a format that we can actually use. But the one thing that we are missing is if you've watched any of my previous tutorials that have used AJAX, we have to tell WordPress what action we are sending it. So what we can do is we can grab form data here and then do a .append. And then we're going to say that the action is equal to user account save. Now, I don't expect you to know why I have that. It's something we're going to be implementing later, but essentially this is the function that it's going to be calling on the PHP side of things, where we're going to be doing all of our checking. So the other thing that I want to do is actually send off the information that we have here. So I have a bundler going with Webpack and all that kind of stuff going. We also need to npm install Axios. Axios is just a great little library that is good for handling post requests and get and all that kind of stuff. So make sure that you have that installed if you're following along. But I already have it installed, so we're just going to import it here at the top. So we're importing Axios from Axios. It's as easy as that. And then what we're going to be doing is, now that we have all of our form data, we're going to be sending it to WordPress. So axios.post, and this is where you would put your URL. There's dynamic ways to do this, but for the sake of the tutorial, we're going to keep it simple here. We're going to send it to wp-admin/admin.ajax.php. It's a very special file that we'll be posting to. And when you send a post request to admin-ajax.php, it's going to check to see if in your post request it has a very specific key in there, and that's action. So when we send over action, it's going to trigger user account save. So after it has been, oops, we forgot to send the data here. So we got to send along form data. And so that returns a promise. And so what we can do is we can actually handle any sort of response that comes through. So when this response happens, we're going to either trigger success messages or trigger fail messages. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But for now, let's check to see if this works. And to check to see if this works, let's just console log the response. So console.log response, oops, console.log response. And then we're going to jump over to our PHP. And so this is where that user_account_save comes into play. So we're going to add a new action here. And this is wp_ajax_user account save. And then we're going to trigger the user account save function. So that's where that action being passed to form data matters right here. It's just going to be looking for that. Then it's going to trigger user account save. So let's create a new function called user account save. And just to make sure we're getting all the right data, let's do wp send JSON success, and let's just send back the post array. So if everything goes well, we should just be able to save the form and get a console log of all the data that we sent across. So let's head back. Let's refresh our page. Let's type in some information here. Let's hit save. We got a response, which is exactly what we were looking for. And so inside of this response, we have a couple different fields here. The important one here is data. So data, the action, email, favorite basketball team. We are getting everything that we needed. So awesome. Let's move on to the next step. So let's move back to our PHP and get rid of this line. What we're going to want to do now is we want to do some verification. Now we have a list of all the keys that are coming from this form. Well, we want to make sure that as we are entering this into the database, this is actually information that we care about. We don't necessarily need to add in the action to our database, but we do care about the rest. So let's create an array here. Let's call it fillable. And what we want to do is create a list of all the keys. So first name, last name, email, favorite basketball team, favorite ice cream, relationship status, as well as subscriptions. So these are the things that we actually want to deal with and put in our database. So let's move on to actually looping over this stuff. So now that we have this array, we can actually, it matches up really well with what's inside of the post array. What we just saw in that response and the response data object was that same list that we're looking at in the fillable array, but with the values in it. So we're going to take advantage of both of those. So at first we're going to take an initiative here, and let's start creating an array called ready for save. And so as we start looping over this, we're going to keep adding it to a new array here. And that's going to act as our basically final result. These are the things that are okay to go into the database. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to loop over these. So fillable as key. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to try and treat all of these pretty much the same. However, there's going to be a couple special cases. For example, email needs to be treated slightly different than first name and last name. And subscriptions needs to be treated than the rest of them because, as we saw over here, it's going to be an array. So let's start by dealing with that array. So let's go down here and let's say if is array post key, then and it's not empty because it could be possible that they didn't fill anything out. Then we want to do something here. So this is only going to happen once we hit the subscriptions key, since we're looping over it. So we're going to create an array called sanitized items. That's going to be equal to an array. And we're going to loop over all of the subscriptions. So for each post key as item. And we're going to take every item in that array and add it to our sanitized items. We're going to append it. And then we're going to run a function on the string input. So sanitize text field. And this is going to get the item. So I know I went through that a little bit quickly, but ultimately what we're doing is we're just, as we're looping through everything, we're eventually going to get to the subscriptions. And once we get to the subscriptions, we need to treat it slightly differently. We need to actually then loop over all of the values that are being sent to us, like Hulu and YouTube TV or Sling or Netflix. And then we need to sanitize those values individually. And so what do I mean by sanitize? I'm going to take a quick second to let you know. So sanitization is something that you need to do every time that you're taking user input and putting it into your database, which is what we're going to be doing. So sanitizing the text field, sanitized text field is a function given to us by WordPress that basically handles all of that for us. It strips, bad code. It strips everything that could potentially be malicious, and it makes it safe for entry in our database. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. And once we have all of our sanitized items, we're going to add it to the ready for save array. So let's do that. Ready for save key is equal to our sanitized items. So now we have an array that is all ready to go in our ready for save function, ready for save array. So let's move on to the next piece. And so everything else that is not a subscription is not going to be an array. So we're just going to capture all of the logic inside of here. So now, even though that everything else that that's coming across is not going to be an array, there is a couple things that I want to show you here. The first one is that email is going to need to be treated slightly different than the rest. So let's tackle that one first. So inside of here, we're just going to straight up check for that email. So if the key that we're dealing with is equal to email, then what we want to do is we want to just add to our ready for save the key. And we want to use another function given to us by WordPress called sanitize email. And we want to take in from the post array that key. So pretty straightforward, but I do want to just purpose here is to show you that sanitize email exists and it has its own special set of rules to make sure that it's not stripping out anything that's part of the email while still removing anything that could potentially be malicious. The next one we're going to be dealing with is the favorite basketball team. So the reason why we're treating this one differently isn't not because we're dealing with like a select menu or anything that has to do with basketball. Basketball team. The reason why I'm treating this one different is just to show you another WordPress function that will come in handy as you're doing this kind of work. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the sanitized basketball, sanitized basketball team is equal to another function, sanitize meta. And so this sanitize meta takes in a couple different parameters. And think of this as kind of a self-directed sanitize method. Like it's kind of like a custom way to make sure that you are getting what you want. So for example, we have a list of basketball teams right here. Utah Jazz, Lakers, Rockets, Knicks, and Celtics. Well, it's very possible to modify this information, right? So if we right click in here, we can change the name of that from Utah Jazz to Utah Jazz Sucks. Like that's well within our capabilities, right? Well, we don't want to just take whatever they've input here and save it to our database because, it could be malicious and it could just not fall in line with what we're trying to do. So what we can do is we can check for that key and then run it through this special function. So we can say, well, if we're dealing with the favorite basketball team, we can send across this, this data from our post array. And this is a user object, so we're going to give it user. And essentially what that's going to create is it's going to create a filter that we can use and check against. So if you see here, the new filter that we have access to is sanitize user meta favorite basketball team. So what that kind of translates to is in WordPress, it's taking in basically are the wildcards that we've put in here. So sanitize underscore something underscore meta underscore something else. So whatever we put in here goes into this first section, and whatever we put in right here, here, that goes into the second section. So that kind of like auto generates a filter that we can then use. So let me kind of give you an example of how we would do something like that. I'm going to scroll down a little bit further here, all the way out of our function. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create a filter. So add filter. And we're going to say on that sanitize user meta favorite basketball team. I know it's kind of wordy, but then we're just going to give it a function as the callback. And we're going to accept the key. All right, let's just call it basketball team. So we're clear. And we're getting that because that's what we passed right here. So if you aren't familiar with filters, I have a tutorial on it that I will link to, but it allows us to take in some information, modify it, or make some checks against it, and then return it. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is we want to make sure that the basketball team that they have sent us here is one that actually exists. So let's, for example, say that all we really want to do is we want to return whether or not it was a real basketball team. So true or false. So not true or false. We want to return whether or not we want to return the basketball team if it did exist, or false if it didn't. So that way we have something to work with. So we want to return, if it's an array, the basketball team that they gave us, and a function called get all basketball teams. And then if it's true, then just return the basketball team. And if it's false, return false. But we haven't created this get all basketball teams yet. So we're gonna create that right now. So hopefully that starts to make a little bit of sense. As when they submit the field, it's going to run that filter. It's going to check to see if it exists inside of the basketball teams array. And if it does, great, send it back. Now it's sanitized. And if not, then return false, and then we'll return an error. So let's create this function real quick, just so we can kind of get the full picture. And all that's going to do is return an array of the basketball teams that we are dealing with. So because Utah Jazz sucks doesn't exist inside of there, then it would return false, and then we could return an error. So let's do that. If we go up here and say, if not, sanitized basketball team, meaning it returned false, then WP send JSON error, say something went wrong with your basketball team, favorite basketball team. Please try again later, or something like that. But essentially, like, if something goes wrong there, something malicious is happening. So let's just, kill the save. We're not going to save any of the fields that we got to so far, and we're just gonna kill it. So next, we need to move on to the rest of the data. But before we do that, we actually have to save the data that we've got from our basketball team. So we are just going to add it to our ready for save function. Give it our key. And we're going to give it our post key. Or no, sorry, we're going to give it our sanitized basketball team. Perfect. One other change that I feel like we should make real quick is we're kind of doing this if just kind of staggered functional approach. Like it's just going to, once it's done with this, it's going to do this one next. I kind of want to change that up a little bit. We're going to do an else if here. And then we're going to do else down here. Reason being is once we've dealt with the email, I want it to just continue on to the next iteration. I don't want it to keep going. So we're going to reserve this else block here for the quote unquote rest of our data. And so we're going to deal with that now. So we've dealt with all the special cases. We've dealt with the things that are arrays. We've dealt with the special email type. We've dealt with the special select type, and we've sanitized it the way that we need to. And so now we're just kind of left to kind of just dump the rest through the sanitized text field function. So if the item that we're getting is not empty, post key, then we're just going to add it to our ready for save after it's been through our sanitized text field. Text field, post key. So that way we can kind of easily rely on just, well, if we need to add more fields down the road, like for example, middle name or something like that, it will just be caught inside of this else statement, and it'll just be handled without us having to do anything special. So kind of future proofs it a little bit. And I like just handling our special stuff up here and just default to the normal way of handling it outside of that. So let's actually move on to saving this ready for save array. So let's go back to our home page here, and let's type in some information. And hit save. Take a look at our response. Something went wrong with updating our favorite. Okay, so we do have a bug in here somewhere, and hopefully none of you are yelling at me for it. All right, let's check out our filter. Oh, okay. There it is. We're checking to see if it is an array versus if it's in array. So we want to make sure that our basketball team is inside of this array, not is an array. Okay, so let's give that a try now. Let's just clear this out. Hit save again. Check our new response. All right, so we are looking pretty good here. We have our email, favorite basketball team, all the information that we're looking for. And so all of this, it looks like it's ready to go right into the database. So before we get too far, let's just make sure that thing is working. So if we change this to sucks, and then we try and save it. Let's check out the response. Yep, and something went wrong. Okay, so that's working. I'm working 100% now. I was a little bit paranoid. All right, let's move on to actually putting this in the database. And this is actually not that hard of a task. We've already kind of done all the hard work already. So all we have to do is we just have to loop over that ready for save function, or ready for save array. We have to loop over it as meta key and meta value. And now we have all the information we need, and we know it's already safe. So we can just update user meta. The first argument is the user ID. Second argument is meta key. And the third one is meta value. But let's actually change this to the function get current user ID. And there we go. Now we should be able to have this saved in our database. So that's kind of half the battle. Let's take a look though and just make sure that everything got in there correctly. I do see a typo though. Let's make sure we do that before we test anything. Update user meta. That would cause a problem. So let's go back to our home page now. Just hit refresh. Let's say I'm Tony Hawk. Casts.tv. Say that I like the Lakers and my favorite ice cream is sherbet. And let's hit save. Got a response. So this is the data that we should be seeing. Now this isn't, I mean, it all looks right here, but how do we tell if it's good in the database? Well, there's a really easy little function we can do. And let's just above get header, let's dump and die. And let's just do get user meta. And we don't need to pass in the second and third argument. All we're going to pass in is get current user ID. And let's go back and refresh. So far so good. First name, Tony. Last name, Hawk. If we scroll down a little bit further, because this is all the information that like WordPress has by default. But if we scroll down a little bit further, email is correct. Favorite basketball team is the Lakers. Sherbet is my favorite ice cream. I'm married. And my subscriptions are Hulu, YouTube TV, and Sling. So all of that made it into the database correctly. So now if we get rid of this and refresh, I mean, none of that information was populated in here again. And so if any of you have done this before, you know it's kind of a pain to write a bunch of if statements and get the meta and put it all in there. So there's a slightly easier way that WordPress provides you to pre-populate these fields with the correct information. So let's get started on that. So let's hop over to our HTML here and let's get into some of this good stuff. So what we're going to be doing is, rather than making individual calls for the user meta line by line, we're just going to grab everything like we just saw. So let's grab a new variable here called user meta, and let's make that equal to get user meta. And we're just going to get the current user ID. And like we just saw a second ago, it's going to give us everything that we need. The only one caveat here is that subscriptions is an array. So what we're going to have to do is unserialize. Oh boy. Unserialize the user meta. And then we're going to grab subscriptions out of there. But even then, it was still an array, so we just have to get that first index. So that will give us a PHP array of our subscriptions, which will come in very handy in a minute. So let's start off with an easy one. Right now we have this Gravatar. And Gravatar, if you haven't worked with it, essentially it's tied to your email address, and you can MD5 hash that email address and put it at where these X's are in a URL, and you will get your avatar. So right now, because it was a 404, we just get kind of the default image here. Well, we have my email address, and I know my email address has a Gravatar attached to it. So what we can do is we can take these X's and replace it with some PHP here. And what we're going to do is we're going to echo out MD5 user meta, and then we're going to grab the email out of there. And that also was an array. All the meta kind of is default stored as an array. So what we should do is we just MD5 that our user email, and we hit save. Let's come back. And now we get my Gravatar. So this is kind of the process that we're going to be following, is we're just going to be populating the values with functions kind of like this. But like I said, there's kind of some WordPress-y ways about doing it. So definitely worth sticking around to see some of those. So the next one is the first and last name. So we're going to get the user meta. We're going to get the first name. Get that index 0. And we're going to do the same thing for the last name. Last name. Let's go back and see the fruits of our labors here. It says Tony and Hawk. Perfect. And so we can kind of see this working. We change this back to Alexander, hit save, and then refresh. Now it's Alexander Hawk. Let's move on to email. It's going to be the same kind of thing, nothing special here. But now once we get to kind of these select areas, now this is where we're going to start seeing some nice little WordPress helpers that will speed up this process a little bit. So what we're going to do is on each one of these options, however we have, and I know that this can be done in a loop, and we can probably do a fancier way of going about this, but I wanted to write it out long form so you can kind of see what's going on. So we're going to give this some PHP tags, and we're going to use a WordPress function called selected. And what this selected function will do will basically, we're going to give it some logic or a couple of pieces of information. It's going to do the logic, and it's going to either come out with an empty string, or it's going to come out with selected equals selected, something like that. So we don't have to write a bunch of ifs, and if it matches, then output this. If not, don't do anything. Like, it's just going to handle that logic for us. So what it takes is the information that we're checking that's coming from the database. And so if this is favorite basketball, we can just grab it from right here. Favorite basketball team. If that is equal to, and the second parameter is what it is currently, what we're dealing with, is the Utah Jazz, then it will output that selected. So let's do that for the rest of these. So we're going to just paste these in and take the team names and replace them here. A little bit tedious, but definitely saves us a lot of work in the long run. All right, so let's take a look and see if that one works. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our team name and see if it saves. So Houston Rockets, hit save. Things coming back. Says that we're now the Houston Rockets. So let's refresh. And now we've got the Houston Rockets as our favorite basketball team. Oh, and let's actually save my email in here. Hit save, give it a second. Let's refresh. And yeah, we're good. So let's repeat that for favorite ice cream. So let's go back. And luckily, it's basically the same thing here. We're going to be doing, instead of favorite basketball team, it's going to be favorite ice cream. And we just have to give it the flavors. So let's just repeat that for each one of these flavors. All right. And it works, like I said, exactly the same way. However, it's not going to work quite the same way with radio buttons and checkboxes. We do have a nice handy function that is really similar, but we're going to run into slightly different scenarios with these. With the radio button, it's going to be a little bit more simple. But since we're dealing with an array in subscriptions, that's where it's going to get slightly trickier. And I'm going to show you a nice way to kind of make it more simple. But we have these inputs here, and I just want to give ourselves a little bit more room. Let's just drop those down. And instead of selected, we're going to do checked. It's another WordPress function here. And we are checking to see if the relationship status is single. And it honestly just works exactly like that. So let's just repeat for the other two relationship status ones. We're going to do the same thing for married. And you do got to make sure that this matches exactly. Like whatever is inside of this value is the same thing that we're checking for here. If it's, lowercase or anything like that, it is pretty strict. And so it's going to not work if those values don't match exactly. So name, value, other. We're just going to see if you are other. All right, let's just kind of sanity check ourselves here and go back. Refresh. So let's go back to the Lakers, and let's say that my favorite ice cream is strawberry and that I am single. Let's hit save, hit refresh, and still Lakers, still strawberry, and still single. Let's go back to married, refresh, we're good. All right, kind of final boss here. We're doing the subscription services. So it's a little bit different because it's checkboxes, and it's even more different because you can have multiples. So that's where we're going to get a little bit creative here. So let's go back to our HTML. Let's go down to our subscriptions here. And it's going to be mostly the same. We're still going to be using this checked function. However, we can get a little bit creative with the information that we're giving it here. So typically it's checking if this matches this, return true, and if it returns true, then output checked equals checked. Well, in this case, we're dealing with an array, so we can't just say, well, is Netflix equal to subscriptions, because subscriptions is an array. So hopefully you can start to see the problem there. Well, luckily, the second parameter in that checked function is defaults to true. So if all we do is return true in the first parameter, it will output checked equals checked. So let me show you what I'm kind of looking at here. So if we do some PHP and we say checked, we can say, well, is the Netflix. Oh, right. We're going to need to do a function here. In array, Netflix, and subscriptions. Now, where are subscriptions coming from? Well, if you remember, up at the very top, we already created that array for us. We unserialized it, we grabbed it, so we literally have an array of our subscriptions in a very usable format. So if we go back down, we can say, well, if Netflix is checked, if is in that subscriptions array, checked equals checked. So let's do that for the rest of them here. Let's check for Hulu. Grab it again. YouTube TV. And then Sling. So let's go back and refresh. So now we have all of our checkboxes checked as well. So we can uncheck Sling and add Netflix. Hit save. Give it a second, refresh, and we have that correct information. So now, technically we have a fully functioning My Account page. However, kind of like I showed you at the beginning of the video, there are some kind of niceties that we're going to pepper in here. So let's get on with that. So back over in our HTML, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll kind of see here that I have a couple callout boxes. One that's for successes and the other one is for alerts. So this one is just going to be a generic, like, hooray, everything was good message. However, the other one is going to come back with an error message. So we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to go into our JavaScript and we're going to create the necessary functionality to kind of hide and show and, disable the button when they submit until it comes back. And then we're also going to go back to our PHP and we're going to do the logic for having some of our fields required. So let's jump over to our JavaScript first. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to start targeting some of our pieces of our form here. So if the form exists, let's just make a couple variables. So the success callout is going to be equal to document.query selector, and it's going to be .callout.success. And let's do the same thing for alert. So we can hide and show those as needed, as well as let's set one up for our submit button. And this one's going to just be the type equals submit. So now that we have access to those, we're going to want it so every time that they submit the form, we're going to want to hide any callout boxes that have been shown previously. And we're going to want to disable this button. So let's do that. So the alert callout, we're going to want to get its class list and add the class hide. And the nice thing about this one is that it will only add it if it doesn't exist. So if it does exist, it's just going to ignore it. So we don't have to do any sort of, checking for classes or anything. The other one is the success callout. We want to make sure that's hidden. And for the submit button, we want to make sure it has the class of disabled. And this is those three classes, or two classes we're seeing here, hide and disabled, that's coming from Foundation. So that's something that you would typically have to create yourself if you weren't using Foundation. So now that we have that, we can start adding some logic inside of our response. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check to see what kind of response we're getting, successes or failures. So let's start by saying if response.data.success. And what that's looking like is, let's actually go back, and I want to show you why I'm doing it that way. So if we look inside of here, hit save. So we're looking for response.data.success. And so that's going to be either true or false, depending on whether we're using WP send JSON success or WP send JSON error. So response.data.success. And so if it is successful, let's just take that success call out and let's remove. So class list dot remove hide. Should be as simple as that. And so if it's not, if it's success false, then let's take the alert callout and take its class list and remove hide. But as we kind of noticed here in our HTML, our alert callout is just basically error with an empty paragraph tag. So what we're going to want to do is we're wanting to take the error message or error messages that we get back from the server, and we're going to populate it here inside of this paragraph tag, giving the user a little bit more information. So let's go back here and let's document.query selector. We're going to select that p tag. So call out alert p, and let's just take the text content here and make it equal to response.data.data. I know it's a little repetitive, but that's just where it lives. So technically anything that comes back, for instance, if we go back here, WP send JSON error, success will be false, and then this will be response.data.data. Something went wrong with updating your favorite basketball. This should be team, by the way. Please try again later. So let's give that a try. So let's refresh this page. And let's change LA Lakers from LA Lakers to LA Lakers rock. Then let's go back to our console and hit save. And yeah, so we got response.data is false, therefore it showed this thing, and it gave us our correct error message. However, we didn't undisable our button, so let's go do that. And that's just as simple as any time that we come back with any sort of message at all, whether it's successful or an error, we can just do submit button dot class list dot remove disabled. So perfect. That gives us kind of our main interactions there. However, we want to require fields. We want to make sure that they have their first and last name there. And I mean, technically we kind of want some other things there too. So let me show you how you would typically require fields on the PHP side of things. Let's go back and get to our PHP, and we're going to go up here to the top. So we've created this fillable array. What we're also going to want to do is we're going to want to create a required array. And this is like kind of similar purpose to the fillable one. This is ones that we actually care about saving to the database. These ones are the ones that we want to make sure have values before we continue on. So we're going to make sure that we have a first name and a last name. And let's also check to see if they exist. So what we'll do is we'll loop over it. For each required as required key, I guess. And let's see if it's empty. If it's empty in the post array, then we need to do something with it. So let's create another array here, say missing fields, because this could be, who knows how many. And if it's empty, then let's add it to that missing fields. And we don't want to just send back required key, because what we're doing is we need to send back some sort of message like first name is required, last name is required. But I mean, I don't want to do anything like this where we're kind of like manually transforming the keys into something a little bit more human readable. I think we can do something a little bit better than that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this first underscore name and last underscore name and just kind of programmatically make it human readable. So we're going to string replace it. And we're going to search for all of the underscores. So there should just be the one. We're going to replace it with a space. And we're talking about the required key here. And let's just uppercase the words. So you see words like that. So first underscore name should look like first name. So that'll give us something that we can actually work with a little bit more. So by default, this is empty. And if there's something that's a required field that does not have a value and is also empty, then we need to do something with it. So if that missing fields thing is not empty, then we need to create a new message. That's going to be a blank string. And so for each one of the fields that is missing, so for each missing fields as missing field, we're going to append to that message. And we're going to just do like a strong tag. And then we're going to take that missing field and the strong tag. And what do we want to do here? Just saying is a required field. Please fix. Oh, and we'll probably want to do some sort of like a break tag here too. So that way they're not stacking on top of each other. And since we know that there are errors, we're just going to WP send JSON error just straight away and give it that message. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I feel like it was pretty straightforward, but let's take a look and kind of see the results. So if it is a little bit cloudy, hopefully seeing it in action will clear things up. So let's head back to our homepage and let's refresh just for good measure here. And let's get rid of first name and last name. Hit save. So we're getting an empty string here. Let's go back. Oh, this needs to be appending to that. That might do it. Let's go back. Let's refresh. First name, last name. Hit save. All right, so we're one step closer. We're getting some HTML, or we need to make it so it can accept HTML. So app. Enter HTML. Let's go back and refresh and hit save. All right, so first name is required field, please fix. And last name is a required field, is a required field. All right, looking much better. So we have, a now fully functional user account screen that we can start calling good, really. We definitely did a lot here. We set up a new form that had AJAX functionality that sent it to our server. We took that information, we validated it, made sure that the required fields were correct, and then we persisted that information back to the user on the front end by allowing the information to be displayed to them. So it was a very fun project. I hope you learned something. And make sure that if you like the content and want to see more of it, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm always open to new ideas. So follow me on Twitter and tweet at me and let me know which kind of information you want to see, what kind of videos you want me to make. And let's open up that dialogue. So thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one.